Hello and welcome to the Classic Car Weekly podcast, the sibling podcast to the popular weekly title. I'm this week's host, Jesse Billington, and I'm joined by our features editor, Chris Hope, and our content editor, James Peen. Gents, how are we?
Very well. How are you?
Not too bad. James as well, yourself?
Yeah, all good, thanks. There's a game of who you go first there, I think.
It's always tricky when it's on Teams because you can't look at sort of incentivize someone to go with a little bit of a look because you never know where they are on the screen regards you. We've all had a bit of a busy week. We were out yesterday shooting something very special and very secretive that I don't even think I'll say what month people will find out when this comes out in. We'll keep it as hush-hush as that much. I think it's one of our favourite shoots of the year, though, so quite exciting stuff. And credit to Chris for pulling it all together. He must have been having kittens on Wednesday night when yellow weather warnings started rolling across the UK.
Yeah, I still don't know how we managed to stay dry. I don't know about everyone else. It was I came over and arrived at our destination about 9:30. And even then, the blue skies were sort of breaking through sort of thing. So, incredibly lucky, incredibly pleased with how it all went. Watch this space.
Yes, yeah, watch this space for a little while. It won't be coming out too soon, but when it does come out, it'll be something special indeed. We'll kick off, as we usually do, with an Hour Classics catch-up. Has there been any change in situation for the cars at home in the garages and workshops, or have we all been just sort of too busy to make any adjustments?
No, the Mini's been in the garage since its Peak District adventure. That's going to be covered pretty shortly, actually. I think that's... when have I got that in? I've got that coming up soon because I've just finished writing it. I'm talking all about that in our November 12th issue, which, as a coincidence, is a special upsized issue where we'll be reporting from the Classic Motor Show. So, you can read all about that then. I enjoyed it. Look forward to doing it again soon with my friends. Just a bit like yesterday. Was hoping for decent weather. Didn't quite happen. Saturday was a washout. Sunday was glorious. So if we go having a better hit rate will be quite nice for the next one. But apart from that, yeah. And in the meantime, I need to start getting the engine out and dealing with some oil seals and some gaskets that need replacing because it can't carry on. It's not burning through oil; it's just pouring it out. So it's. I think it's probably this is the end of the year now for the Mini in terms of road going. I need to do some work on it and get it fighting fit for next year. So.
Yeah, no, we're both battling major leaky componentry when it comes to our cars. The Jimny is still stranded with no oil in its gearbox, and there's no point in me pouring more oil in because it just seems to come out the bottom of it just as quickly. So I do need to phone someone to get that properly sorted because Lord knows I don't have the time to learn how to disassemble and reassemble an entire gearbox. But a specialist might have a better chance at doing that. Given it took me a year to build an engine, I can assume it's going to take me about a year to build a gearbox. So that's the last thing I really want to spend a year doing is rebuilding the gearbox on my daily driver. So
that's the crucial bit, the daily driver element. So.
Yeah, you could do with getting it back on the road as soon as possible. And I'll send it into a dealership that I know well, and they've got a good workshop, and they'll be able to get me at least a few pictures. So there'll be a short write-up appearing in CCW at least, because it's not my work that I can't really sort of write too much to cover it. But hopefully there'll be an update on it soon. But there is certainly one on the MG coming soon to Classic Car Weekly. That'll come out a couple of weeks after your Mini trip as well. So there's classic stuff going on in our world. James, how about yourself? I know you're sort of still battling a few jobs here and there, and you had the Dynamator going into the Beetle the other week?
Yeah. I mean, the plan was to get the Beetle ready for my wedding, which is a week today, actually. So that's not going to happen.
Congratulations.
Thanks very much. Yeah. So I've started to switch attention to the T5. So oil leaks, common theme. So I got all the front end all ready to go back together. It's all back together bar the oil cooler, which I realised the last garage who worked on it hadn't fitted a oil cooler seal, which explains the massive amount of oil that was smashed over the front end. So it's all ready to go. I've got the seals. They turned up yesterday, thanks to the majesty of buying online. And yeah, hopefully I get a few moments over the weekend, possibly. I didn't say that if Sophie's listening, to fit those. And then I can put the front bumper back on, and then it will at least look like a complete van again.
Yes.
That's, as long as it looks complete, that does the trick. Yeah, I've been sort of.
It's
Doesn't
looking
feel
like
like it's going to be like a wedding photo sort of candidate anyway, to be fair, is it? So
No,
if it's looking a
no.
bit scruffy, it's not the end of the world.
But we've got people coming to stop, and we need the drive space, and so to have the T5 exploded all over the driveway is not a good look. So yeah, hopefully I get a bit of time this weekend to sort those issues, along with a few other bits and pieces.
Good luck.
Yeah, hopefully we get that turned around. Anyway, with our classics out of the way, we'll touch on what does cover our front page quickly, and this is the FBHVC survey. And our noble editor, David, has been away at the FBHVC conference recently, and you'll be able to read all about that in the upcoming issue. So we're going to sit tight and wait till we can hear his sort of thoughts and opinions on that. But when it comes to conferences and discussions, I have also been away at some big important meetings, and recently it was the Historic and Classic Vehicle Alliance Heritage Matters Day, the HCVA. We went up to the Jaguar Land Rover Heritage Centre up just outside Coventry, lovely little location, and had a number of interesting sort of talks, discussions and panels hosted by the HCVA. And there was some great news that came out of it, and it sort of fills our spread on 4-5 quite nicely with some really interesting stories and relatively positive news as well. This sort of mostly focused around getting younger enthusiasts not just into the hobby but also interested in the more broader cars within the hobby, with some great talks from the VSCC and the Veteran Car Club about trying to incentivize younger people into these sort of more offbeat and interesting cars. I know we've sort of held back on running that because we're going to do some sort of auction based numbers following up from the Veteran Car Run, I think, is what we're sort of planning to utilize that on, and sort of see whether or not the markets are actually sort of aligning on what they're saying. But there is definitely market trends emerging for young people. The Iconic Auctioneers managing director Rob Hubbard said that essentially what he's seeing is a shift in not just the cars that young people are buying, but in the fact that they want auctions to be done differently. And I know that Chris, you and I both bought our cars through auction. James, I don't know if you've bought cars through auction before.
Never sort of bit the bullet. I've been to numbers of auctions and just sort of always sort of backed out, just I don't know. It's not really something I've ever got involved with, but I do love the excitement of an auction. I think I get bidding for you, like that eBay moment where it's like I'm going to put one more bid in. I think I get carried away.
Yes, yeah, and I potentially sort of buck the trend when it comes to young people buying at auction, in the fact that I went along to Anglia when I bought the MG, had a look at the car in person, and sort of bid on it in the room. The trend that Iconic Auctioneers have seen and the way they've had to adapt their business has been one that incorporates more of a digital and online side, which sort of tied in nicely in the post-COVID or the sort of through COVID spell, where they figured they could still run auctions entirely online, and it was trying to see what the market wanted there. And it was high quality digital imagery, video walkarounds, and stuff that sort of gave them the ability to access these cars in a completely new manner. And that's something that a younger buying audience really goes for.
It's not surprising, is it? I mean, you're seeing that sort of trend on the high streets as well, aren't you? So you're seeing situations where why would you nip down to the shops to buy clothes, try them on, when you can have them delivered to your home and returned if they don't fit with minimum fuss sort of thing. I think it's very much an extension of that, isn't it? So
yeah, it's online shopping for the classic car world.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's a certain amount of reassurance by seeing a car in the metal. First of all, you see it actually exists, and it's not a scam. Not that I would suggest that any of the reputable auction companies are going down that route, but there is just something more reassuring about seeing a car in the metal. Even that's my take on it, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Whether I can actually see any faults with it once I've seen it in the metal is neither here nor there. It's not like I'm possibly any better off for seeing the car in the metal than I would have been by sight unseen, sort of thing. But you take my point. There is a certain reassurance to seeing something in the metal, but when it's normal to sort of see something on the other side of the screen and then for it just to materialize on your driveway or in through your letterbox or whatever else, I suppose it's not especially surprising that generation have no issues with making that sort of purchase without seeing it in the metal.
Yeah, it's an interesting. James, go on.
No. So my sort of experience of younger people is if they can avoid talking to someone face to face and send something by email, then they will. So it kind of makes sense.
It's a sweeping generalisation. Yeah, it's very true.
It is, but it's actually a very true one, isn't it? It's very true. I think that myself as well. If I can send somebody an email rather than speak to somebody on the phone, then I will do it. So I think if you don't then have to sort of speak to an expert or somebody in an auction house, but you can read a really long description and look at the photos, then it makes sense to do it that way, doesn't it? Although, as you say, nothing's ever as good in the real world when you actually see it. So it's a dangerous way to buy something, but I can totally get why people do it that way.
Is there a little bit of, with a generation that has grown up with Instagram and an appreciation that the reality they're presented isn't necessarily the actual reality sort of thing, that perhaps they're more forgiving of sort of seeing a car that looks absolutely perfect, concourse pristine, and then it gets in there and it perhaps falling short of expectations, and that's somehow been okay and normal. Again, I'm not suggesting that auction companies aren't properly describing cars or anything like that, but you've seen the photography. I'm sure that readers have seen and listeners have seen the photography that's used to illustrate some sales. The cars look cracking. They look absolutely fantastic, and the description outlines everything that's there, sort of thing. But what your eyes see is on the screen is perhaps not how it's going to look when it finally gets there, sort of thing. So, and there's perhaps just where we would sort of be a little bit unsure about that. The younger generation is they're okay with that. That's a given to them. They appreciate that's going to be something that might happen or inevitably will happen.
Yeah,
we've all done it, haven't we? I mean, how many times have you post something on Instagram and you've got like a million comments? Oh, that looks amazing. And you think, actually, if you saw it in the flesh, it's not that great. But it's just how it goes, isn't it? It's just it's one of those things. Buying online, looking at anything online, it always looks a little bit more glamorous.
I think certainly it's an interesting sort of read on the way younger generations doing it, but at the same time, it's seemingly good for the industry. They've Iconic saw that typically pre-COVID, they're having about 300 to 400 bidders for sort of one of their major auctions. And now that they've sort of fully embraced an online and digital side, they're seeing sort of north of 1,800 registered bidders for some of their bigger auctions, which is a huge increase. And again, if it's bringing people into the classic car hobby, making it more accessible for people to sort of take part in, I don't think it's any sort of bad thing. It's just sort of one of those shifts that sort of is going to naturally occur. Sort of at the end of the day, it's sort of a demand and sort of source situation. If there's the demand for these online digital versions of things to occur, and it sort of means that the business can keep going and these classic cars can keep changing hands, that's perfectly fine. We'll move on to our next story. One of the other interesting things to come out of the HCVA Heritage Matters Day was they had a panel from the DVLA there. And previously we've had an invite extended to the DVLA to attend an HCVA conference. They didn't show up. This is one that I previously reported on from Bicester Heritage. And it was going through another sort of rough patch for the DVLA. They'd come in for a bit of stick recently. So they sort of made an effort to arrive for this one and sort of actually took on board a lot of what was said, which was quite interesting to see how readily they were to engage with sort of the classic community and sort of take on board sort of the feedback that we were giving. And one of the pieces was taking on board something I'd had from Classic Car Weekly readers who had been sort of getting in touch and said that they, despite the new regulations, were struggling to get sort of cars re-registered after restoration work or importing, and were still sort of butting heads with people on the other end of the phone that just didn't seem to understand the process, as well as the fact that every time you phone up, you essentially have to start the process again because it's never the same call handler. There isn't a log of what's been said. And these were sort of important points that were raised. And the DVLA sort of said, okay, we're going to have to go back and look into training and ensure that sort of the people that you actually get in touch with on the coalface are sort of better read up on, not necessarily sort of encyclopedias of classic cars, but more certainly the way that the new legislation, the new rules, the new paperwork applies to older vehicles, so they can sort of better advise and assist on those processes. So it's positive news in that sense. But I'm quite fortunate in the fact that I don't tend to have a lot of personal run-ins with the DVLA. I don't know if you guys have had instances with that at all. 'Cause James, you've had sort of Beetles moving here and there and everywhere. I don't know if it's been a hurdle for you.
I was expecting the worst because obviously I speak to a lot of people who've had massive issues with DVLA, and I have to say it was so easy to register the Beetle. And I buried my hand in the sand for ages. I had that car over here for a couple of years thinking, the longer it went on, the more difficult it was going to be to register it. So I kept putting it off. Yeah. And eventually I sent all the paperwork off, sent the photos, and then within 2 weeks, I got a correspondence saying we were sending an inspector out to check your car. He came out, checked it for probably 10 minutes. Most of the time we spoke about its Dupree, to be fair. And then 2 weeks later, I got all my paperwork through. I just think it depends on case by case, isn't it? Some are more difficult than others.
You couldn't have hoped for a better scenario where the person who's coming to check your car was a classic car enthusiast himself. I don't think it's a given that every person who comes out falls into that category, does it? So
no, and the difficulty here is like we all kind of expect everybody at the DVLA to be like really into their cars and everything, and the reality is, let's be honest, it's like most of the people who work there, civil servants, another sweeping generalisation, much like myself. When I was straight out of school, I worked at DEFRA department, dealing with people taking their dogs on, taking their dogs on holiday. So I'd get phone calls from people asking me all these questions. And it's like, well, to be honest, it's a job, and I've got a tick sheet of what I need to ask, and I do that. And if that doesn't work out and they have to come back, they have to try and hopefully get hold of me, or they speak to somebody else and they start again. So I kind of get the frustration, but it's just the way the system works these days.
I think I speak to enthusiasts who still lament the closing of DVLA offices. But if we cycle back to the conversation that we've just had, we're now dealing with an emerging generation that doesn't want to do things face to face. It made complete sense as to why that wasn't something that could continue, sort of thing. I know that's. I mean, I was I think I was in my 20s sort of thing when they closed. So it's, we're talking well over a decade now since those offices have closed, but people still sort of, when they've had to deal with them, they've always had very good sort of feedback with those local offices. But again, how much of that is rose tinted? How much of that is whatever else? I think my takeaway from them being at the HCVA is perhaps just it shows the prominence of the HCVA in general. Normally, when we do any sort of news stories involving the DVLA and correspondence and things like that, it's usually through the FBHVC. So it's fantastic that the DVLA is sort of spreading out and considering other organisations, looking at other areas where they can have a touch point with classic car owners and enthusiasts. I think that's probably it's a good thing.
Yeah, it does show that they realise there's work to be done on the system, and they are actually listening to everybody's issues as well, which I think is a real positive way to look at it.
And they sort of showcased a lot of their sort of new online forms and documents and how-to guides as well. This is one of the big steps they'd sort of put in was, as we've said sort of with the younger generation coming into classic cars, a lot of what we do is just sort of direct access through online portals and online platforms. And there's sort of how-to guides on there because obviously a younger generation is likely to be a bit more tech savvy, a bit more sort of au fait with using online systems. So they made sure that they'd implemented sort of online user guides for how to do this, which forms to access, how to fill them out, how to appropriately sort of send them off. So they have made strong efforts to sort of incorporate this and incorporate it well within sort of the group of users that are going to be using it when it comes to motor vehicles, classic vehicles, heritage vehicles, everything from sort of modern stuff all the way through to the realm that we work in, the older vehicles. So there's been some good efforts, and again, it's very easy as certainly a classic writer or a motoring journalist to just bash the DVLA because it's an easy target point. It's one that regularly comes in for stick, but I think at the same time it does merit when they've put in the effort and put in the hard yards to actively try and improve their service, to actually sort of make proper note of that and sort of say, yep, hats off to them. They've put in the hard work with this one and done the proper job.
I mean, hopefully we start seeing benefits from that, though. It's fantastic that they're engaging with us, but I'm sure that more cynical listeners will be thinking that, well, I've heard this before, and I've still not personally seen an improvement, sort of thing. So it's great that obviously James had his positive experience. I think just if you've had positive or negative experiences, then do let us know. It's useful context, sort of thing. So we regularly speak to people at shows, and if it comes up in conversation, then of course we're more than happy to sort of chat with you guys about that. But it's not the first thing you probably want to talk to us about. You probably want to talk to you about your cars and things like that. So it's not always unless it's a really sort of burning issue for you, then it's not something that's generally raised. But yeah, it's useful to know where things are at. So please do let us know.
Obviously, they've only recently rolled a lot of this out. As with any sort of major logistical change, there's going to be teething issues. So it's sort of give it a bit of time. We'll see sort of come sort of January, February, there might be sort of new intake of personnel across the new year. There's every chance that they'll sort of wean out any of the sort of final issues. Another one of the interesting talking points that came up, again, with the whole sort of conference focused around the next generation, getting younger people into classics. One of the important things is passing on ownership of vehicles. And I appreciate that certainly in my case, I'm sort of very much too young to be thinking about who's going to end up with my MG if it's still on the road by the time that I sort of get to any point of passing. But for sort of looking at current generations of classic car owners, they are, one of the statistics that came out is 70% of classic cars are owned by someone over the age of 65. Planning for the future at that point is a significant sort of milestone and something that should be tackled. And we had a legal expert from East Devon Law, a chap called Ian Hunt, who was on hand to sort of advise how enthusiasts can best utilise sort of the existing legislation to ensure that their classic is most easily handed down to their next generations. And utilising the 7-year rule, you can pass it on as essentially it's classified as a gift without benefits, as or gift without reservations of benefits. So that means essentially you can transfer the title over to your son, your grandchildren, and you won't pay capital gains tax on the vehicle at that point, and it's technically a disposal. And if the vehicle stays within their ownership for 7 years before you pass away, it also completely loses any value when it comes to inheritance tax as well. So it just means that transferring vehicles to the next generation is also a far more affordable thing. If you've got to utilize that planning as well, you've got to almost predict that you will live for another 7 years from the moment you do it. So it is a bit of a sort of a guessing game, but the percentage of inheritance tax you pay does start to dwindle after 3 years. So at 3 years and 1 day, or that the amount that you will pay in inheritance tax on a vehicle that's passed down starts to tail off. It's called tapering, is the official phrase that's used, and it's a taper relief, I think, is the full term for it. And the net result is that it does mean that there is a perfectly legal, perfectly reasonable means for people to pass their vehicles on to their next generation, but it just takes a bit of foresight. And it was a very interesting thing to come out. And again, with my grandfather, with my father, we've got sort of numerous classic and heritage vehicles in the family. That planning has to kick in at some point. So it's certainly going to be, it was a useful personal take home, because it's something you're going to be able to sort of sit down with dad and granddad and go, we've got 2 Rileys, we've got a load of Scotts, Douglases, Velocettes. We're going to have to make some plans here, granddad, soon. And sort of utilize this. Of course, that is all great news. I think it's fantastic that if you can have a greater say, if you do want vehicles to be passed on, that is streamlined, and that your relatives are not going to be penalised in any great terms. What I found really interesting on that topic is one of the owners who attended our photo shoot yesterday. He described this very same quandary, and without spoiling the cars that were taking part, it was a very top end luxury saloon, and he described a situation where he would like nothing more for it to pass to his grandson. However, there is the issue whereby if anything were to happen to that car with regards to its bodywork or even its mechanicals, it was very, very likely that sum runs to thousands and thousands of pounds to fix. And that he had concerns about that burden, placing that burden on his grandson, sort of thing. So he didn't want a scenario where just because the car had been sort of gifted to him, that he then felt this obligation to keep it going no matter what. And I think what you've described there with that tapering sort of situation is that perhaps it's another. Not only do you have, this, I'm holding on to this in memory of a grandfather. I'm also going to lose out if I get rid of it now, sort of thing. So it's obviously it's very car dependent. It's very car specific. But it was a bit of an eye opener talking to this chap, because sometimes you just think that, well, I'd like nothing more than for a wealthy relative to show up and leave me their pride of joy that's valued at well in excess of £50,000. But the upkeep of that beyond maintenance, if anything goes wrong, if anyone crashes into me, if something that just isn't supposed to go pop goes pop, then what do I do? Because it could just be literally impossible financially for me to get this car back going again. This is where the reservation of benefit sort of plays in. Obviously, the title has to transfer over, but the actual sort of act of physical ownership is very loosely defined. The actual vehicle's residence has to change. So in the case of my granddad's cars, they would have to move from his home to another location. But if it's easier, you can keep the vehicles at their original location and you have to pay for storage. There is no definition as to how much you have to pay for storage, as long as there is evidence that storage is paid for. That can be £1 a month, that can be however much you want it to be. That way, technically, you still own the vehicle. While it might not live at your registered address, you're paying for it to be stored somewhere else. It just so happens to still be stored at your granddad's. That's just where you're paying for it to be stored. That is, again, perfectly within the rules. And one of the other things is, once you've transferred the title, granddad can still use the car. Granddad can still maintain it. Granddad can still do all the work to it. Granddad can still pay for all the work to be done to it. That isn't sort of infringed upon. So the usage of the vehicle was still sort of retained.
It sounds like it's perhaps a little bit less daunting for those people who have expressed a desire in granddad's car, but the thought of actually being responsible for it is probably quite intimidating. So it gives you that sort of graduated sort of build to proper full-on ownership when the inevitable passage of time occurs, and that means that your parts are from your loved one sort of thing, and that leaves you as the true custodian sort of thing. But that's properly interesting.
Yeah, the best way of viewing the 7 years is not just the taper of the inheritance sort of tax on it, but also a great year or great period of time to spend engaging in that transfer of information, that transfer of the vehicle, of ownership knowledge, of sort of, certainly when it comes to older classics like the one we had along at the shoot yesterday, certainly when it comes to my granddad's Rileys, they're 1920s, 30s cars, driving them, maintaining them, keeping them sort of roadworthy and functioning is a skill set and an art form unto itself. That's an important skill that needs time to transfer as well. So it's, again, the whole idea of future planning within your family is just as important when it comes to sort of tax and sort of financial side, as well as it comes to the practical side of things. So there are sort of two great ways of sort of folding it into sort of one expanded time period for sort of the security of your own vehicle for the next generation.
I mean, funnily enough, I had two conversations yesterday on a similar theme. So it's clearly something that a lot of people are concerned about. Yeah. So there was somebody who's had a car from new that they inherited from their father, wanted to pass it on to their children, but they are worried that they can't actually take it on. So they're now faced with, like, what do we do with it? We don't want it to sit in a garage. So do we sell it and then it's gone? And then there was another instance where an elderly chap had passed away and his car had been disposed of via an auction, but in a general sale alongside records and vinyl and things like that. So his family won't get anywhere near the money that car was worth. The club weren't given the opportunity to buy it themselves either. So that's a valuable asset that has just disappeared into the system somewhere.
Yeah. I think it's, for many people, quite understandably, it's an uncomfortable topic to approach. Dealing with your own mortality is perhaps as intense a topic as you could choose to sort of engage with. But if you do have that love and affection for your children or those people who are closest to you, then perhaps it's a really sort of worthwhile endeavor to make sure that that they're benefiting as greatly as they can. I'm not even talking potentially financially there, but just that they're in the best possible place to look after this car that you want to gift them, sort of thing. So the sooner that you can be sort of engaging with that, the better, really, sort of thing. So it's, and as Jesse's already described it, these new sort of rules and measures give you that sort of kick up the backside to maybe sort of think about that sooner rather than later. So
yeah. It's an interesting and important sort of thing to look at and consider when sort of we're talking about it. But we'll move on to a lighter topic and we'll dive into the main feature on this week's issue. And this is a celebration of Back to the Future, and absolute enthusiasts of the film will recognise that earlier this week, actually, obviously we're recording this on the 24th of October, we'll recognise that the 21st of October is technically what's recognised as Back to the Future Day. And of course, we are 40 years on from the date and time to which Martin McFly travelled back to the past. And we've put together a really interesting sort of feature looking at some of the sort of cars that feature in the film series but aren't necessarily the main star cars. And there are some interesting picks. It must have taken a bit of digging around, Chris, to find sort of some appropriate choices to slot in.
No, it's a good one. We didn't just focus on the original film. We covered the trilogy sort of thing. So we had everything from sort of Citroen DS based taxis to the 1980s Toyota that you picked, Jesse, that was the 4x4 that Marty had been coveting throughout the entire trilogy, and there at the reward as a reward at the end of the films once everything was put back to normal sort of thing. So yeah, I mean it's. Obviously, a lot of it is American, but what surprised me was just how much sort of European metal was in there as well, sort of thing. So there's at least 2 BMWs. We've got one of them in there, sort of thing. But yeah, there's I hadn't realised until I started researching this feature that Marty's dad in the corrected 1980s was there with the 7 Series sort of thing. So and yeah, I mean I'm not probably spoiling anything by saying that James chose the bay window camper. Which again is the most iconic and also unlikely choice of vehicle for your is it Iranian terrorists?
Iranian terrorists, yeah.
It is Iranian terrorists.
No, it's Libyans, isn't it?
Libyans, yes, you're right.
Libyans, thank you. Yes, I knew I was
Libyans.
wrong. So yeah, we just had a bit of fun with it, didn't we? Sort of thing. We're not, we didn't make any sort of special sort of groundbreaking sort of calls on terms of this is the time to buy or anything like that. These are just cars that prove to be memorable or sort of that we think are sort of interesting cars to sort of cover. So.
Yeah, some nice picks there. I do like the inclusion of the BMW 633 CSI. Interesting choice for because that was obviously the basis for Biff Tannen's car when they get to futuristic 2015, which by my memory 2015 looked nothing like it did in the film.
No hover cars.
No hover cars, no hoverboards. Though I think Nike did make the adjustable trainers as sort of a one-off to the anniversary in that year as well, which I sort of rue never getting hold of a pair, but I can imagine they're quite expensive. But yeah, I was quite lucky. I got the choice of the Toyota Hilux, and again, if anyone said to me sort of, if you could have sort of a car from that film series, there is obviously the obvious choice. But I think for me, I like a pickup truck. This is no surprise. There's no secret the amount of times that I've chosen them for sort of team pick choices and discussed them on the podcast. But yeah, the Hilux, the SR5 was sort of the top trim level for it, and it looks good as well. It's, if you want to get very filmic about it, very film studies, back at sort of doing an A-level in film studies, it very much represents something throughout the film series as well. There's sort of this focal point that Marty sort of focused on for returning and sort of is posited as sort of the true timeline to which he can return. So there's, yeah, also it just looks damn cool with all those Casey spotlights.
Now, the shock is that with so much sort of 1950s American metal, you didn't pick a Buick or a Ford Crestline or something along those lines. But hey ho.
Yeah, the Buick Super is really nice. That belonged to just sort of a passerby, wasn't it? It's the first car that Marty flags down.
Literally,
in
it's the car I chose. It's literally the
yeah.
first car that Marty sees in the past. So, which is, yeah, it has all of literally about 3 seconds on screen, and before the wife of the driver sort of screams at him to sort of drive away from this chap who's in a sort of terrifying yellow radiation suit sort of thing. So, yeah, but it's, yeah, it was my pick just because it beautiful chrome laden jukebox on wheels sort of thing. So it's exactly the kind of car that was inspiring sort of the British designs of the late 50s sort of thing. So yeah, I wanted to pick something along those lines for this feature. So, and that's the one that really stood out.
Yeah, there's some nice choices there, and it's annoying that we weren't allowed to include the steam locomotive from the third film. But hey ho, we'll have to see if Rail Magazine.
The difference between a vehicle and a car.
Yeah. Really sort of pushing the boundaries on what we can sort of slot in. Maybe Rail Magazine will want like a small feature on the steam locomotive used in that. But no, we've included alongside that, we do have a sort of lead story looking at sort of the DeLorean and sort of arguing the case that it's a bit more than style over substance. And I was going to say, it's an interesting car to sort of enjoy, experience, and sort of put together this sort of little story on sort of from behind the wheel, and sort of the feel of it was sort of very unique, and the just sort of getting to experience it and having to set aside sort of the childhood sort of, oh, this is the DeLorean, and sort of focus on it in purely sort of a road testing aspect and sort of getting an idea for sort of its feel and the way it behaves on the road. And it's interesting, having tested several generations of the Lotus Esprit earlier this year, the DeLorean borrows heavily from it in its design and its sort of assembly. And there are points when you're sort of on the road as it's moving around where you can feel a little bit of that Esprit nature in it. And it's differently set up to an Esprit. It feels a little bit different, but there are certain elements, the way that it will rise, the way that it will sort of nose into a corner, you just get this slightly different feel that you're like, that's a bit Esprit-ish. And you can sort of get that sense of things. So it's quite exciting. And again, a brilliant chance to tick one off the list for me personally. So
I mean, it's hard to work out. Do people buy DeLoreans because they like the DeLorean, or is it a Back to the Future thing? I think it's one of the most iconic cars from a film ever. I mean, it's equal billing with Marty and Doc, isn't it? The DeLorean, and it's just like, it is timeless, which is ironic. It's a time machine.
Yeah.
It's almost along those lines of, if you are lucky enough to have the money involved, then do you buy a DB5 because you think you're James Bond, or because you just appreciate it as a fine Aston Martin sort of thing? So
do you buy a Pontiac Firebird Trans Am because you think you're Burt Reynolds, or because you just like 70s muscle cars?
100% Burt Reynolds.
Yeah, but that's sort of, I think that I think the DeLorean, because it is such a unique car and because it had such an interesting production life as well, it's one of those cars that it never had sort of a foothold on society. It was the butt of jokes through its time period. It was sort of immediately built, bought, and forgotten, and you could argue that it's only because of the film that it's ever actually remembered.
You could, but the thing is, whenever you see a DeLorean, whenever you think that's cool, don't you? No matter what, you see the DeLorean, you think that's cool.
Yeah, because
you don't see too many sort of aluminium sports cars, do you? With unpainted,
unpainted steel cars with gull-wing doors. And then obviously there's the recent addition to the unfinished steel vehicles that are on the road these days, but obviously they're not road legal in the UK, the Cybertruck. So we're not graced with that monstrosity rumbling around. But it's a brilliant little issue, and I have to say I really enjoyed putting together the Back to the Future feature. And if we're speaking of cars with weird doors, we'll touch on the 5 trials as well, because that's a smooth segue.
It really was.
the BMW Z1, and this was a really interesting car to drive, one that I'd never sort of been truly motivated to sort of give a go to, but the opportunity came up. We're heading that way anyway to get another car shot for a 5 trials, and I was like, oh, Z1, interesting. And I was pleasantly surprised by this, actually. It's a refined, relaxed sports car that can sort of have a good bit of poke to it as well. It feels very sort of BMW, very solidly built, but at the same time just has these random quirks in its doors, and you're like, why did BMW do this?
I mean, what's the quote? It's like they created a solution to a problem that never existed. I mean, why would you need your doors to disappear like that?
So you can drive around sort of Berkshire with them completely dropped down and have everyone in the nearby towns point at you and go, what's wrong with that man's car?
But that's crucially it. What I find really interesting about the Z1, and it's come through in your copy, how it was a German sports car for the German market. It doesn't really sort of factor anywhere else sort of thing. It wasn't like, unlike so many cars, it wasn't produced for the largest market at the time. It wasn't produced for America or produced with American sensibilities. BMW, for whatever reason, just felt like making this sports car, and as you say, it has certain unique qualities sort of thing, but it sort of reminds me of almost like late production Capris and MGR V8s. It's that they weren't really built with any sort of market in mind beyond the home market. I mean, that's maybe a little unfair. Very focused on the home market and what the home market wanted, and there might have been a trickle of other cars. The only reason that you found these cars outside is because people have brought them in sort of thing. It's very rarely that they bought them new and from overseas sort of thing. So Yeah, I find it quite interesting from that point of view. It's very much a snapshot of in time of what Germans wanted from their sports cars and how that was quite different from some of the other sports cars at the time. Look at the MX-5, look at things like that. So yeah, I mean, it tends to get forgotten because everyone sort of focused on the Z3 from that period, doesn't it? Sort of thing. So
Yeah.
it's definitely one that was worth investigating. So
I don't think BMW even started making the Z3 yet because GoldenEye was the launch of the Z3 in 1995. So there was also no SLK at the time either. So there was no rival to it. BMW just built this for the sheer hell of it, which actually comes across quite nicely in the way that it drives. It's just sort of an engineer's sort of daydream that sort of became reality. And it's a really exciting thing to drive in that sense because it is so unique and that's sort of a little bit different. And because it didn't have anything to compete against, there was sort of no reason for it to have a big spacious boot or sort of normal doors or room for anything behind the seats. So you have this very short, very compact chassis where you've got no room behind these two completely unique seats. These are not used in any other BMW car. They're completely fixed back items. You can see them in the sort of the inset shot on the first page of the spread. They're really nicely trimmed. They've got this sort of body matched sort of panel down the back of them. And then you sort of go and think, oh, just go chuck something in the boot. You open the boot and it's about the size of an envelope because beneath it you've got the fuel tank, the spare wheel, and this sort of sculpted exhaust muffler, which is part ground effect, part rear splitter. And you're like,
why?
And
it almost feels like sort of the I can imagine a story of how this vehicle came to fruition being very similar to that, something like the E30 Touring, where an engineer just took a car and just built it, and then someone took a look at it and went, "Oh, that might be marketable." It's so mad that it's definitely from a mind of an engineer rather than sort of a design clinic that's sort of working with potential owners. I think there's no one on earth is probably going to go and say they want these features, but an engineer has decided that this car is going to have them.
It was an engineer who clearly never kept his phone in his pocket. How many times have you dropped your phone out? Like, imagine driving that. Oh, that's gone.
Bouncing down the road behind you.
Yeah.
Well, mobile phones in the 1990s would have created quite a crater if they were to fall out of the car for whatever reason, wouldn't they?
It was still technically tethered to the center console. But no, because obviously this wasn't actually designed by BMW. They set up like their sort of little offshoot company for their radical design house, BMW Technic. And I sort of mentioned it in the story because the chap who was at the helm of it, Ulrich Bez, was sort of this mastermind of weird automotive engineering through the 80s and 90s. He was the man who produced the Turbo 911. He did a variety of interesting F1 projects and motorsport projects, and then simply sort of arrived at BMW and went, right, we're going to make a completely weird sports car. And BMW went, cool. I guess you're sort of like the peak of what you're doing at the moment. We might as well let you do it because it's going to be good. The sort of man that sort of Midas touch, everything turns to gold. And so he sort of pulled apart a BMW 325i, chopped down a chassis, chucked it together and went, there we go, we'll fit it with some funky rear suspension, we'll make the doors disappear, and you won't really have a boot, but you will have a surprising amount of rear downforce. Cool. And everyone went, great, I'll have one of them. Or at least 8,000 Germans did.
Which is all they needed.
you look at what cars are designed for now. It's all iPads and gadgets and stuff, and it's just like a means of getting from A to B, isn't it? As economically as possible. Whereas back then, if a company could build a car because they could, they did, and we got some crazy stuff in the 90s and the 2000s. Good times.
It was a car designed for enjoying the idea of a car. And I think that, again, comes across in the way you drive it. It's not the most scintillating sports car. Lotus Exige or from sort of the early noughties is probably sort of a more out-and-out sports car. But you get the sense of it just feeling special. And this is one of the things that came across when I was talking to a lot of owners at our shoot yesterday about sort of why you own your car, what you enjoy about your car. And it's the fact that it just brings a bit of a smile to your face every time you get in it. And I think that's what the Z1 does so perfectly is you drop the doors, you sort of drop down into it, and it just gives you that little bit of a tingle, that little bit of excitement. I think if a car does that to you, that really sort of, in my mind, certifies it as something that's to be cherished and enjoyed. And yeah, the Z1, absolutely brilliant, but not the first car to have unconventional doors either. I did a bit of digging for the little sort of timeline bit and found the Kaiser Darren. So this was a series of cars produced by the Kaiser Car Company through the 50s, and the Darren was their sort of drop-top sports car. And instead of having hinge-away doors or gull-wing doors, as was sort of a bit of a trend in the 50s, these slid forward into the front wheel arch. So you had this very awkward angle from the sort of windscreen rake into the sort of front wing before you got to the front axle, because there was this huge panel space that the door would slide into. And it didn't look great, but you could get it with a removable hardtop as well. Unsurprisingly, very few ever sold of that. But yeah, it's a fun car, and I genuinely enjoyed it.
Looking at the Z1, do they even count as doors when the sill is that high?
They're merely a small obstruction.
Are they not? They're almost. I would almost call them like windows or apertures. Certainly not doors. They're not affording access, are they? You still got to looks like you still got to step quite high into the footwell.
It's not an easy car to get in and out of if you have, let's say, mobility issues. You do have to step very high, and it's a good thing that the windscreen sort of frame is sort of properly reinforced. You essentially step into it as you would a beach buggy, hang on to the windscreen, and then sort of drop down into it. But once you're in, it's a fun little thing to blast about in. And yeah, so this was a day that I spent with another journalist, and we essentially just raided BMW Heritage's fleet while we were there. So she's got a BMW M5 that's coming out in a few issues' time as a 5 trials, and we also had a go in their 3-litre CSL Batmobile, which was very good fun, though I suspect it needed some fresher tyres because that thing was prone to understeer. And if you've ever seen one on a racetrack, they're, if anything, quite the opposite. And the absolute peak for me was getting to drive a BMW M1, something far beyond sort of the normal realms of Classic Car Weekly. But again, another one of those boyhood sort of ticking it off the list and absolutely rinsing that engine sort of on sort of the bypasses and just sort of hearing it wail all the way round. And as you lift off, the fuel cutoff just shuts off and you just hear the exhaust snap and crackle behind you as you get the next gear. And yeah, there's a mean trick to sort of going around the roundabout very slowly, opening up the gap on the bypass. And at that point, a chap in a Golf R thought it'd be fun to try and sort of keep pace with me, at which point I was like, nope, and just gone. And you could just see sort of him sat in sort of my mirror, just sort of going, yeah. So that was a very special day indeed. And yeah, I hope the excitement of getting to drive these sort of unique BMWs really comes across in the piece. So I enjoyed doing that one. Enjoyed sort of researching the Z1, sort of put together the story in its entirety there. So plenty to enjoy. We've been chatting for quite some time, and there is plenty more to enjoy in this week's issue. We've got a month in auctions when you get to the buying opener, so looking back at the enormous amount of auctions that really happened through September and some of the fantastic figures that have come out of there. On top of that, we've obviously got Out and About. We've got all the usual news and expert views, brilliant next generation diaries. We've got a young owner who's got a Rover P4, very left field choice, but great to see cars from that era getting sort of enjoyed by the younger generation as well. And of course, the way we were heads to Allenby as well in Cumberland, with some lovely 19 sort of late 50s cars emerging onto the scene here as well, including a rather nice Triumph Roadster tucked in the background. So lovely stuff indeed. Otherwise, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
No problem.
And we'll crack on with producing the next issue of Classic Car Weekly.